Like many dairy farmers, Steve and Paula Holdem need new tools to reduce their nitrogen leaching without jeopardising profitability. 4 seasons ago, they decided to have a crack at sowing plantain into 100 hectares. Now the herb is over 90% of their land, with up to 28% plantain content in their pastures. Today, you'll hear Steve talk about their experience with Ecotain plantain, what's worked well, what they've learned about maintaining it, how it's saving them from reducing their stocking numbers, and how they're looking forward to seeing all of Plantain's benefits included in Overseer. Also on the podcast is DairyNZ's Plantain program lead Kate Fransen, who'll give a clear overview of what a decade's research has taught us about plantain. New results show even better than expected leaching reductions can be achieved. My name is Ben Chapman-Smith, and this is episode 50 of Talking Dairy. Let's get into it. Steve and Kate, thank you so much for joining us on Talking Dairy. It's very good of you to give up your time. Kate, let's get started with you. Tell us about the Plantain program. Who's involved and what are the aims?
So the Plantain Potency and Practice program started in 2022, last year, and it's a 7-year partnership led by DairyNZ and with co-investment from MPI through the Sustainable Food and Fibres Initiative, and PGG Rights and Seeds and Fonterra are also partnering in the program. We also have another 7 delivery partners in the program who are all doing the mahi and collaborating in a big way across all those organisations. The total investment in the program is more than $22 million. And the reason for putting so much behind this initiative is because plantain shows lots of promise to be a low-cost, high-impact solution for reducing nitrate leaching while maintaining profit on farm. And we know that there's lots of regions around New Zealand who are all working towards improving water quality. And so we hope that this program can really help. What we're aiming to achieve is we want to quantify the effect of plantain on nitrate leaching. So we know that from previous work in our Forages for Reduced Nitrate Leaching program and also another program called Greener Pastures, we know that plantain does reduce nitrate leaching through small lysimeters. We've done measurements through those. We've also done metstall studies and shown that it reduces nitrogen in the urine. But farmers really need to see that this actually is going to work at paddock or farm scale. So we have these 2 big research sites at Lincoln and Massey universities, and they are measuring both the total amount of leaching under the soil at paddock scale and also how much production difference we get between different levels of plantain in the system. We also want to know how plantain works in different soils and climates across New Zealand. And so we're working on that in all the regions across New Zealand. We want to know how it works as well to reduce nitrate leaching. So we know lots about how it reduces nitrogen in urine, but there's also effects going on in the soil, which I'll talk about in a minute. So how does that work in different soils and climates? We want to identify risks to markets and animal health and any benefits. And so we're doing lots of work looking at milk and meat and having a look at whether or not plantain changes those in any way. And we're developing management strategies to keep plantain in the pastures and ensure they fit into farmers' systems. So we've got 23 partner farms across New Zealand, all helping us to see how to establish plantain and keep it there in the pastures. We have a plantain cultivar evaluation system. So we know that there's some differences between cultivars in how effective they are in reducing nitrate leaching. We want to assess across the different cultivars, understand that a bit more, and develop a system where seed companies can test their cultivars for reducing nitrate leaching. And we want to make sure that if we develop this mitigation strategy, that regional councils across New Zealand are actually going to recognise it and make sure that farmers are getting credit for the amount of nitrate leaching reduction they're getting from plantain. So we have an end user advisory group with all of the regional councils represented, and as well as farmers and other stakeholders like milk companies who are interested in this. They're gathering together to make sure we've got the right systems in place and that everyone's recognising plantain. And lastly, we want to make sure that we achieve widespread adoption and impact. And so we want to obviously improve the water quality across New Zealand, but we also want to maintain profit on farm. And so our overall aim is to get this thing adopted across New Zealand and make sure it's doing its job to reduce nitrate leaching and maintain profit.
Kate, how does Ecotain Plantain actually work? What are the mechanisms involved?
Research is telling us that there's four main mechanisms that are driving the effect of plantain on reducing nitrate leaching. Now, the first two we have lots of confidence in, and the second two we're still doing some work to figure out exactly how it's working. The first two relate to urine. So we know that the urine patch is the main reason why we get lots of leaching from dairy pastures. And so, high concentration of nitrogen in a urine patch means the plants can't use all that nitrogen and some leaches below the soil. What plantain does is it actually helps to dilute the urine. So, the cow actually pees more frequently through the day, and a total amount of urine is actually increased, but each patch is a smaller amount of nitrogen. And so, therefore, the plants can utilize it more and the nitrogen spread more evenly across the paddock. Now, we think that occurs because plantain's very high in water, low in dry matter, but there's also a potential diuretic effect going on that we're still investigating. Now, the second effect is about what we call partitioning. And partitioning is about how much nitrogen that the cow eats goes to urine versus dung versus milk or maintenance. What we know is that when an animal eats plantain, just because of the nutritional makeup of the plant, more goes to dung and a little bit more to milk per kilo of dry matter, and less goes to urine. And so the amount of nitrogen going into urine each day is reduced when the animals eat plantain. The third effect we call the direct nitrogen retention effect. And essentially, what this means is that the soil is able to retain more nitrogen and the plants have a better chance to use it before it is lost. Now, we know that this sort of effect is at play because when we add urine from ryegrass to a plantain pasture in a lysimeter, it reduces the nitrate leaching. And so even without the urine coming from the plantain, it's still reducing nitrate leaching. The way we think this is occurring is that these things called plant secondary compounds in the soil coming out of the plantain roots, slowing down the process of converting this stuff called ammonium coming out of the urine through to nitrate. And ammonium stays in the soil and it can be used by the plants, whereas nitrate's very soluble. It joins with water and it leaches. Okay, so that's how we think that plantain is affecting nitrogen cycling. The last effect is simply the same thing. The animals eating the pasture, those secondary compounds are going through the animal and coming out in the urine, and so the same thing's actually happening in the urine patch itself. That's how we think that plantain is working, Ben.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. And Steve, I'm going to get to you in a second. Thanks for sitting there waiting patiently. But Kate, just one more question before we cross to Steve. How widely is plantain used in New Zealand? What's the uptake like? And is there any difference from region to region?
Yeah, so plantain's used in small amounts throughout New Zealand. Initially, farmers, particularly in dryland areas, have been using plantain for years to increase summer and autumn green feed. And in some cases, they manage animal health issues such as ryegrass staggers and facial eczema tend to be lower in plantain pastures compared to ryegrass. The sheep industry has also used plantain for many years for its anthelmintic benefits, so reducing worm burden. So, as we've been focusing more on getting dairy farmers to use plantain for managing nitrate leaching, we've found that there's some regions where it seems to thrive more than others. So, we've got partner farms in 5 regions across the country, and we're finding that those that are in Rotorua, like where Steve is, and also North Waikato, particularly on those sloping landscapes, they seem to find it very easy to get plantain established and keep it there by simply broadcasting the seed. Those in the Tararua district, where we've done lots of work on plantain in the Manawatu, and on Canterbury irrigated pastures where ryegrass is a bit more competitive, they seem to have to work a bit harder to get it into the pastures and keep it there. These areas, it's still working. It's just that farmers have to probably establish it as part of a new pasture to get really high proportions of plantain, and they need to keep topping it up after a couple of years. So we're in the early days of forming those regionally specific management strategies, and our partner farms are playing a big part in that, as well as some field trials across the country we're working with.
And that's a good time to bring you in, Steve. Hey, so some people will have read the Inside Dairy article about you, Steve. For those who haven't, can you introduce yourself to us and also tell us a bit about why you started using Plantain and when?
We farm here in just off the top of the Mamaku Plateau in the Lake Rotorua catchment. Yeah, we bought here 2017, so we're in our sixth season now. Before that, we were sort of share milking. Paula and I did the traditional contract milking, saved some money for cows, but we went share milking for about 16 years, I think. And we were over in the Waikato, and we actually, I think Plan Change 1 was coming in at that time over there. So we knew a bit about it. We knew regulation was coming at a great rate of knots. So we thought, let's take the opportunity to jump into a catchment that's already heavily regulated, and it's already got the rules. Then we know what we're getting and know, what we can do with it. And at that time, it was actually, Mum rang up because they were kiwi fruit orchardists. And then she said, why don't we go on together and buy a big farm? So they sold their orchard and we came in and we've got, it's 300 hectares here, 265 effective. So, we just ended up together buying a bit of scale and, Mum and Dad are on the farm, but, just watching what's going on, really. So it's worked out pretty good for all of us. So, but what it meant was when we did the numbers to buy in here, we originally could start out with 700 cows or 750 cows. By 2032, because of the regulations in this catchment, we have to drop nitrogen leaching by about 35% across the catchment. So back then we had an old version of Overseer, and what it really meant was dropping 200 cows out of the system. And that was the blunt tool to do it. Yeah, and when you do those numbers, actually you grow more feed than actually you can feed those cows in those systems. So you end up selling feed off, and it doesn't, financially it gets a bit tough. But we took a punt. The area was pretty good to buy, and it's been an awesome farm. Actually, we love it here. It's summer safe. It's a really cool area to farm in. But right from the start, we were looking for tools. How are we going to stop this happening? How we don't want to lose 200 cows because that's, labour unit gone. How do we keep it sustainable and profitable at the same time? So to start with, I think the first thing we picked up on was low end size. That was one of the ones that came out. And actually, there's been some good work lately that's showing that that's still the way to go. The only problem with those, it's a 5 to 10 year plan because it's in genetics, so you don't get those straight away, So that's still going on in the background. Then there's other tools. There's been Spiky coming out, I think. They're doing some trial work, and that treats the urine patches, but, that's a tractor pulling it around and another job and all that. And Plantain was also talked about, so we thought, heck, let's give this a crack. So, that's where we are. We're having to go with the Plantain and getting part of this trial and seeing where it goes, really.
So am I right that you started using Plantain about 4 seasons ago?
I think it was our second season here. So we thought, let's have a crack at it. We just chose about 100 hectares of the farm and threw it out on that. We put about 4 kilos of seed on that, just in the fert. And that next year was like, holy heck, it's everywhere, Let's have another go. So we did the rest of the farm, and I think we probably put 2 to 3 kilos on that, just in the fert spreader. Plus we do a bit of undersowing as well. So whenever we did that with our annuals, we just throw a couple of kilos of seed in there too. So by the time we did that, the third year, we thought, holy heck, there's just Plantain everywhere. This is awesome, the job's done. So we sort of sat back and thought, no, we don't have to do anything more. And that year, the regional council were getting quite interested because they wanted a tool for farmers to use as well. So they asked to come up and measure it all. And we had 28% across the whole farm, which is where we need to be. So we thought, job's done. Next year, it was like, oh, where's it all gone? It disappears. But, what we worked out, it's not a one and done job. It's sort of 2 years it lasts for this Plantain. So we're sort of working out, we've got to probably put a couple of kilos in every year just to maintain that level. We had a field day here the other day, and it worked out we're at, I think it was 17, 18% across the farm, but we're rebuilding again. So, we're just working out whether that 2 kilos enough in the fert every year is going to be enough to maintain that 30%. Or we may need more than that, maybe 3 kilos. Look, at the end of the day, it's pretty cheap because you're talking just over $20 a kilo. And you only need 2 kilos. So to be able to milk 200 cows for that sort of input is nothing really, to get the good results, what the regional council need to.
So as one of the partner farms involved in the Plantain program, what does that actually look like? What does it mean to be involved as a partner farm?
Essentially, we just open the gate and let DairyNZ in here. They've been in regularly, walking around, counting plantain plants and stuff. But not only, on farm, physical stuff, we sort of let them know what we've done, when we've done it, and then that's going to tie in. So everyone's doing different things. So it'll help them come up with a sort of a plan going forward of how to maintain that plantain in the pasture. The other side of being a partner farm is opening the books so that DairyNZ can come in and run different models and of how we're going, what it's going to look like into the future. just to see financially how much the environmental regulation is going to cost us with and without tools. So.
Good one. Hey, well, Steve, we'll come back to you in a second and get into some of the numbers and some of the results and how you've implemented Plantain. But Kate, talk to us about some of the results that you've achieved recently from the program. I understand that they're pretty exciting.
Sure. So at our two big trial sites, Massey and Lincoln, as I mentioned earlier, we're measuring nitrate leaching under farmlet studies. And what we've seen at Massey, which has now got 3 years of data, is that we've been able to reduce nitrate leaching by between 20 and 60% when there's been between 30 and 50% of plantain in the pasture. And what affects the amount of leaching that you have is, in terms of percentages, is, for example, how much rainfall is in the year. So in the first year, there was actually not very much rainfall and not very much leaching. And so we reduced nitrate leaching by 60%. But in numbers terms, it was lower, okay? But in the second year, there was lots of rain, and we reduced it by 20% where there was 30% of plantain in the pasture, and 46% where there was 47% of plantain in the pasture. And so the amount of plantain in the pasture also affects how much nitrate leaching you get. Now, it's not to say that 100% plantain will reduce it even more. There's possibly a sweet spot there so that ryegrass in the system is actually utilising the extra nitrogen that's available and able to be used. Now, the third year, we had some interesting results. This is the results sort of fresh off the press, where plantain has started to decline after a couple of years. So the percentages of plantain are lower, in the order of sort of 18% in one treatment and 22 in another. And we're still getting reasonable reductions, so up to 20% in those treatments, but yeah, lower than the years where we had higher amounts of plantain. The other thing that's happened is that we've got really high clover in one of our treatments where we've tried to oversow plantain and clover to get the plantain really high. And so we've got low ryegrass, high clover, and high plantain. And where I say that there's high clover, I mean average 34% and up to 50% clover at times. Now in that treatment, we've had high leaching. And the reason for that is because clover fixes nitrogen into the soil, and it also is high in nitrogen protein itself. And so there's more nitrogen coming out in the urine. So we just have a message there that we need to make sure that our clover is not pushing up sort of above about on average 20% for the year. We've got some other trial work from Massey that shows that at about that level, you start to leach a bit more. So yeah, that's a nice message coming out of our third year of the treatments. In the Lincoln site, it's showing similar results. So after 1 year, we're still getting pretty good nitrate leaching reductions in the order of sort of 30 to 40%. However, we've only got 1 year of data there on a pretty low rainfall year. So I'm quite keen to get more data before we form any conclusions from there. There's some other work that's actually looked at nitrous oxide emissions. So we know that nitrate leaching and nitrous oxide emissions are fairly well linked. And the work that's been done from AgResearch shows that you can get on average up to about a 53% reduction in nitrous oxide emissions from having plantain in the pastures at about 30%. And they also showed that that effect was occurring without urine from plantain. So you remember me talking about the soil effect? They've shown this for nitrous oxide as well. And there's some new data from Massey that's sort of backing this result up with about a 40% reduction in nitrous oxide emissions. In terms of production, on our big trial sites at Lincoln and Massey, essentially the message there is that there isn't any penalty from having plantain in the pasture, certainly for per cow production. And in terms of looking at all the trials that have ever been done, there's some results there that show on average about a 0.07 kilos of milk solids increase in production. The Rotorua study, where we did lots of measurements on pastures on farms, showed about a 13% increase in pasture production. And we've seen similar things on our farmlet studies in the new program. And that timing of the increased pasture production occurs in summer autumn. So you're getting a bit of an advantage there. And if anything in spring, late spring, you're sort of getting a slight penalty in some cases from having the plantain in the pasture, but in general, pretty similar to a ryegrass pasture. The last area where we have some key results around this market risk and opportunity. So we can confirm now from the work that's done by Fonterra that there is no risk to human health from including plantain in pastures. But the other thing they found, which is quite interesting, is that plantain milk or milk from plantain pastures is higher in omega-3. And so omega-3 is something that you find in strawberries and olives and fish, and they're marketed for that sort of thing. So this might be a good marketing opportunity too. There's no material impact on milk composition. In some studies where there's really high plantain, so 80% plantain, they've seen a bit of a depression in fat. But other than that, no, in normal sort of mixed pastures, we haven't seen that impact on composition. Plantain milk is higher in minerals like calcium, sodium, copper, and zinc. That's just because it's better at harvesting those minerals from the soil. In terms of meat, we are looking into the accumulation of cadmium because, for the same reason, it's also better at harvesting heavy metals. That's only an issue in offal, and we're just sort of doing the tests now to sort of work out how much of a risk that is when it's accumulated over time. But again, in meat, there's some potential health benefits that could be promoted there, so watch that space.
Super interesting. Thanks, Kate. And let's cross to you, Steve. Tell us about the results that you're seeing on your farm.
So as we've introduced it, it's been quite interesting. It almost grows like a weed. You just broadcast it out and it fills those gaps. I think it's really helped our pastures, rather than doing the annuals. I'm thinking going forward, we don't need to bother with that. We can just throw the plantain out there. Although the annuals probably complement the winter growth more than the summer. Like Kate said, it grows more in the summer. But yeah, that's definitely been good in that regard. And that trial work that Kate said, that it's growing more feed in total, especially in that summer autumn period. You're getting up to an extra ton in some of those trials, which is, why wouldn't you do it if you're going to get those sort of results from a day? So also, when we bought the farm, it was quite weedy. We had to do a lot of winter spraying. So we did 3 years of winter spraying, and that coincided with when we started the second year in, and we thought, oh no, that'll wipe it out. But it didn't even touch it, actually. It must have been the time, because it's, winter dormant. Well, it's not winter dormant, but it's slower. So whether that, we sort of got away with it and didn't affect the plantain too much then. Well, we never saw a real big issue with it anyway. We still got to that 30%, even while we were doing winter spraying. And even now, we're doing a bit of Kelly thistles, just spot spraying around. And yeah, it's still there. It's still going. It does knock it back a bit, but it still keeps going, eh? So, in talking to some other farmers, we haven't experienced the same, but they say it just grows like a weed. You can pug paddocks and it just comes back again. Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. As far as other things we've seen, it's sort of hard for us to tell because we've been developing the farm as we go, as we've introduced it. So our production's increased, everything's been going, but our fertility of the farm's been increasing too. So yeah, it's a little bit difficult to say for us because our farm's been changing as we've introduced it. So we also did some financial modelling as well around running different systems to meet our 35% reduction for the catchment. And the first one was just a blunt drop our cow numbers, like we talked about earlier. And that came back at about a 10% reduction in overall profit if we were to do that. So drop 200 cows out of the system, your costs do lower, but you're not making use of the grass you're growing because you've got too much feed in the system when we have to sell feed out. Another one was also, because the way it works with nitrogen leaching, the best way of reducing it is through the autumn. So getting cows off the pasture, and if you put them on feed pads for longer, and then spread that effluent over a bigger area, there's less leaching, you see, because they're sort of peeing on the concrete and it's going into the pond and then being spread around rather than patches around the farm. So we modelled, building a big barn, put them in that for 16 hours a day, and just through that period, get more intense in that period just to keep that nitrogen off the pastures. That does work, but you're also looking at a 17% reduction in profit because of the capital costs and ongoing costs of running another system. It's another job too. I'm not sure I want to be bringing cows in, looking after them all day too. You want to keep it simple, farming, you want to be pretty easy. Let them out in the paddock and do their thing, But when we model plantain as it is in overseer today, which doesn't have all those effects or the ground effects that Kate was just talking about before, we had a slight reduction in cow numbers, but it wasn't many. And yeah, that gave us a 4% reduction in profit. So this is looking out to 2032. So that's when we have to be there on this farm, in this catchment. So I'd like to think by then the modelling will be an overseer, but not only the plantain, but we'll also maybe those low-end sows will be in there, and there'll be other tools. And it's probably a combination of all the things depending on what you need. And yeah, potentially we could end up milking more cows if we really wanted to by then. Just the way the numbers are going with Plantain, it's pretty awesome stuff, eh? So, and obviously at the moment we're probably achieving around that 15-17% reduction. If we had 35% in the pasture, we're not quite there. So we're probably talking, I don't know, 6-7% that we're achieving at the moment. But yeah, we're trying to keep the farm business viable. So we're pushing, we need to keep our staff, we need to keep cow numbers, we need to keep production going in the vet. So we use that reduction to essentially have more cows on so that we can be more profitable. And we're hoping by 2032, when our 35% comes through, all those tools will be in there and we'll be able to, the farm, we won't even be any different to any other farm or any other catchment. So,
Steve, you've talked a little bit about establishing and maintaining Plantain on your farm, but also I'm interested in knowing, like, if you've got any tips for other farmers on how to get the best out of Plantain.
Essentially, you just graze it like your pasture. So your normal ryegrass clover mix, it works exactly the same. It's got the same growth pattern, so that 18 to 21 days, whatever it is, grazing round, that works best for it. If you let it get it too long, it can go fibrous and woody, but not, geez, I've never noticed it on this farm. I'm only talking about some other farmers say they've had problems with the cows don't eat it. That's probably when you get on late rounds, late autumn, maybe that could happen. But yeah, we go out to 50-day rounds and I still have never had an issue with that myself. But yeah, just generally looking after it's just the same as ryegrass. Yeah, just treat it exactly the same. You do get little seed heads pop up. You do worry about it. You think, oh man, that's quality's gone, but it's got nothing to do with the quality. It's the leaves that have the ME in it. So,
You mentioned some of the things earlier that you've been learning through the process about resowing and things like that. Is there anything else that you've learned that you haven't touched on already?
there's nothing simpler than throwing it on the fert, and putting it out in the paddock. It costs no more because you're going around with the tractor anyway. Some guys put it on top of the fert, some guys mix it in the bin, but I know the fert companies will do it for you, depot as well. We do it ourselves. We do our own fert, so we just throw it in on the ground. While it's here, mix it up with the bucket, throw it in. And there is two different types of plantain. They coat the plantain as well, the Ecotain. So you get a lime coated one. It just makes it a bit heavier and it'll throw a bit further with your fert spreader. We did it a couple of times without that coated, and it works, but you just end up strips up the paddock because it doesn't throw as far as your fertiliser. But then again, you just next time around, you just go in the gap between. So we do find when we undersow it, we don't have as good results. But whether it's because I'm putting it too deep, because it's only a little seed, it's only it's like a clover seed, you see. You're just throwing it on the ground's all it needs. But it probably does come through, but it's like another year later. Like it takes a bit to really get up and going. So, but you don't expect it. Don't put it in and then expect it to be there next month. That doesn't happen. It's probably 6 months later before it comes through. Yeah. Even that next year is when you really see it in that second year. And then it sort of disappears. Well, it doesn't totally disappear, but it definitely weakens, that's for sure. So,
great. Kate, we know that in some regions, farmers are facing some pretty tough requirements for meeting nitrogen leaching reduction targets. How can Plantain be used as a tool to help with that?
So Plantain's now recognised as a mitigation option for nitrate leaching in 4 regional councils. So Bay of Plenty, Horizons, Canterbury and Southland, where rules are in place, they're all recognising Plantain, which is awesome. To get credit for using Plantain, farmers need to use a cultivar that's recognised as effective by the Plantain cultivar evaluation system that we've developed as part of our program. Effective cultivars are listed on the DairyNZ website. Currently, Ecotain is the only product that is recognised as effective by our cultivar evaluation system. And historically, it was made up of 2 cultivars, which are tonic and agritonic. Now, tonic's no longer available, and so it's just made up of agritonic. Now, the reason these being recognised as effective is because we have lots of data on both tonic and agritonic that shows their effectiveness, and currently all our trials in the Plantain program are using agritonic. And we know that there's potential, or that there are some differences, so there's evidence of differences between cultivars in their effectiveness. So to get recognised for using Plantain as a mitigation option in regional councils, you need to be using Ecotain currently until we get other cultivars recognised as effective. Farmers also need to use the DairyNZ visual assessment guide for determining how much plantain is in the pasture and recording that, often with photos and providing that as evidence. That exercise is done in autumn, and you can see the website, our website, for instructions and the guide on how to use that. So currently plantain's accounted for in Overseer for its effect on just the urinary nitrogen effects. And on our partner farms, like Steve's partner farm, we have looked at how much nitrate leaching reduction you get from including that in Overseer. And on average, farmers get about a 6% reduction for every 10% of plantain that's in the pasture. And so if you've got 30% plantain, you get about an 18% reduction in nitrate leaching. To farmers like Steve, that's really helping to meet their current nitrate leaching reduction targets. And as Steve said, the exciting thing looking into the future is that once we understand more about how plantain's affecting nutrient cycling, that increased reduction should be included in Overseer, and we're aiming for that to occur in 2027. And thankfully for Steve, that coincides with the next step down in how much nutrient reduction he needs. So yeah, Ben, that's basically where we're at with regional councils and meeting limits using plantain.
Very nice. I think you've already covered a little bit of it, but talk to us about any other work that's being planned as part of the Plantain program.
We still have 5 years of the program to run. Our big trial sites are at Lincoln and Massey University. They've still got 2 years of data. And then we're working currently with Fonterra on the processability of milk. So are there any differences between plantain and ryegrass pastures in terms of product texture, taste, quality of things like butter and cheese? Our partner farmers and the network of field trials that we've got are working on understanding those differences in persistence of plantain and developing those management strategies. That's going to keep running right through to 2027. And we've got these 4 plot trials that I haven't mentioned, which are comparing different cultivars of plantain. We've got all of the commercial cultivars in there, as well as some breeding lines. And we're looking at the differences in the properties that affect nitrate leaching. And we're also putting animals next year through met stall trials to determine differences between the cultivars in those urinary nitrogen traits. Also on the plot trials, we've just started measuring nitrous oxide in collaboration with the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Council and AgResearch. We're also looking at opportunities for measuring methane on our bigger trial sites as well, and having a look at how plantain is affecting methane. There's some big questions, obviously, around how plantain is affecting that nutrient cycling in different soils. And so working hard to answer that one and get it into models by 2027. So that kind of summarises, Ben, what's to come in the program.
Yeah, exciting stuff. And finally, Kate, how can farmers stay up to date with the research results?
Yep, so we have an area on our website which is dedicated to plantain under the feeds section of our website. And we've also got these annual Partner Farm Community of Interest Group days, which are held in autumn in the Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Manawatu, Canterbury and Southland. The Canterbury one is coming up on the 15th of May. We've had the other ones already, but stay tuned for more field days and make sure you get on board with those next autumn.
Yeah, and for listeners, we'll put links in the show notes to all of those things that Kate's mentioned, plus an earlier podcast on this topic I think we put out last year. Hey, so Kate and Steve, thank you so much for your time today. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, get into it. Yeah, that's what I say. Yeah. Just from my perspective, it's really interesting the amount of work that's going on to tick all the boxes for this to make sure it's right for us farmers to use. I know with Fonterra supply, but they're really looking for tools. They need that low carbon footprint stuff coming through in the future. So it's quite exciting, something that's real simple for us farmers to use. Just throw it out there and we can get these good results. So, yeah, but they're doing some awesome work behind the scenes, I was saying. So, yeah, really appreciate it. So.
Champion, good on you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and I have to say it was a real pleasure going to Rotorua on Steve's place for the Community of Interest Day the other day and seeing what Steve's doing, but also seeing all the other farmers and them telling their stories about how this is a bit of a no-brainer. They should just get into it. So that was quite good. Really engaged group of farmers. And some of the other regions got more challenges in actually keeping plantain in the pastures and getting plantain into the pastures. Rotorua does seem particularly straightforward, and so that's probably something to keep in mind as well, is that we do have some management challenges. It's not that easy everywhere, but yeah, certainly some good stories to tell.
Brilliant. Thanks very much to both of you.
No worries. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for tuning in to Talking Dairy. Check out the show notes for links to DairyNZ's Plantain webpage, plus a podcast we put together last year about Plantain and other useful web pages. Also, keep an eye out for the June-July issue of Inside Dairy, which includes an in-depth article about the science behind Plantain. Catch you next time.